Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about on today's show related to the entertainment side of the NFL. On today's rundown of the episode, I'm going to bring you guys the potential contract extension coming down the line for 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy and how the 49ers are pretty open to doing that, so that's good for Brock Purdy. Hard Knocks, the television show that goes on throughout the NFL season for a specific NFL team, will now be extending it to a whole division, so I'll get into that a little bit more, as well as LSU's Pro Day that happened yesterday and how it was very impressive and a very big performance from Malik Neighbors and their quarterback Jaden Daniels. So all of that is coming up later on today's episode. Before I jump into the first segment, however, please remember to follow, like, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast on social media or either YouTube channel, as well as reminding you guys, if you have any questions or comments during today's live show, to use the tip and donations link running across your screen there. The tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. This makes sure I'm able to see your questions pop up right away in the live chat box. I can read your questions on air and maybe take the conversation somewhere else. It's a lot more engaging and entertaining for me if you guys are able to do this. I think it makes the show more fun, on top of helping the show a lot, as well as all the other shows across the network. So we always thank you guys immensely when you guys are able to use the tip and donations link with any of your questions. Saying that, I can start with the first topic on today's episode, the TV schedules and the NFL making some changes to some of them. Not so much bringing a lot of changes to week, but the TV schedules and streaming really most of all, with Peacock, Amazon Prime getting more involved. There's some international games as well. So with that being said, the biggest international game to start off the season is in the first week. It will take place on Friday night opening weekend for the NFL, in which the most likely it will be the Eagles playing in that game, and they will either be facing the Cleveland Browns or the Green Bay Packers in that game, September 6th on a Friday, streaming exclusively on Peacock. It'll be the first ever NFL game in South America, and it'll be the first NFL game played on a Friday night on opening weekend in 50 years. As well as I mentioned, the international games. There's 3 other games in London and 1 other one in Germany as well. Those have become a bit more routine, but now we get this Brazil game, the first ever one in South America with the Eagles. And I said either the Browns or the Green Bay Packers, but it was funny that I don't remember when, but Maurice Hurst, a Browns defensive tackle, was on a local television network getting interviewed about the team and whatnot, and he pretty much said that, he was talking about the season, and he said, we have a game in Brazil this year. Not confirming it right then and there so blatantly, but you can't get much more obvious than that, and it's looking like it will be the Browns versus the Eagles in Brazil, which will be, it'll be very exciting for me to see how that all plays out. The NFL taking all of their hype and popularity down to South America, where obviously it's not the number one sport. I don't know how popular it is down there or how notable people down there keep up with the NFL, but it will be interesting to see it all play out, how much media attention is on the players bringing their game down there, and even things like weather, the climate, and just being in a new environment, how that affects both teams. I'm sure there'll be a lot more attention on that leading up to the game, but that's one thing. Streaming exclusively on Peacock is also another big thing, because that seems to be where the landscape is shifting with all these streaming networks and stuff like that. Peacock got exclusively their playoff game last season with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins, and with that, They were able to get an average of 23 million viewers during that game. They reached about 27.6 million viewers in total. And just in terms of records for Peacock, it was the largest day in Peacock's history with 16.3 million concurrent devices streaming at the same time. So it is a big deal to have Peacock still doing this, an NBC streaming network. I'm sure they're going to get more involved down the line, but this is a big development in that. And similarly connected to that, talking about playoff games and streaming networks, it was also announced that Amazon Prime Video, the network that has exclusive rights to Thursday night games, all the Thursday night games are now played on Amazon Prime Video. Now they will have the exclusive rights to a wild card game this season, January 2025. It was reported that Amazon Prime is paying about $120 million for the rights to show the game, which is $10 million more than what NBC paid to show the Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins on Peacock. Like I mentioned, the numbers speak for themselves, and on that, adding Amazon Prime now to the list of streaming networks to stream a playoff game, Roger Goodell, the biggest thing with Goodell, he said, was that he doesn't want the Super Bowl ever to get to that point. I'm not saying it's getting there, but he did say that he wants to fish, the NFL wants to fish where the fish are, meaning where all the attention and where all the common now familiarity with streaming and where everybody watches their shows on is heading towards streaming now. And the NFL is smart, obviously, to follow that trend and continue that on. But it does bring worries just because people don't want to pay for these subscriptions, keep track of all of them, and trying to figure out which game is on Peacock, which game is on Amazon Prime, and stuff like that. It can get confusing for some people, but like I mentioned, like many people have mentioned, it's just an adjustment period. I'm sure people will get used to it, but that's the way the NFL is going. And before we get to the biggest news, it is also announced that the Hall of Fame game will be played between the Bears and the Texans on Thursday, August 1st at Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium at 8 p.m. It will take place during the Pro Football Hall of Fame Enrichment Week in Canton, Ohio, so that all lines up. And it makes sense for these two teams because the Bears have 3 Hall of Famers in that class getting enshrined: Devin Hester, Steve McMichael, and Julius Peppers. And the Texans have Andre Johnson, the first Texan ever to be elected into the Hall of Fame. So that was announced. Potentially we could get some exciting play from Caleb Williams if he is drafted to the Bears and if he is playing in that game. So that was also announced. But the biggest thing is the Christmas Day games. A big deal because not only is Christmas on a Wednesday this year, which is already weird for the NFL to play on a Wednesday, but before it was stated, I'm pretty sure it was mentioned by the NFL's Vice President of Broadcasting, Mike North, that the NFL wasn't going to try and play on Christmas when it fell on a Tuesday last season, and that they were going to keep their stance, that they weren't going to try and make this a regular thing. But obviously, with the numbers coming in and the money coming in and how much attention it gains playing on Christmas, people will regardless be glued to their screens watching. They went back on it, and now they will play a double header on Christmas. And it is weird, like I mentioned, it's not a regular thing for the NFL. Through 2015, 96 seasons of the NFL, there was only 17 games played on Christmas, and from 1948 to last season, there had only been 2 games played on a Wednesday of all days in NFL history back in 2012 between the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys. And then a game was switched to Wednesday in 2020 because of COVID between the Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. So this year, that's going to change. Another game on Wednesday, not to mention 2 games by the NFL. And if you look at the whole spectrum of the schedule this year, there's going to be NFL games at least on one day of every week, at least once this year, except Tuesday. You got the Monday games, Thursdays, Friday, like I mentioned, with the Eagles. There's going to be games on Saturday, obviously Sunday, then Monday. Tuesday is the only day of the week this season where there's never going to be an NFL game. But you honestly never know if you have some schedule issues. I'm sure something could and potentially has the potential to go wrong. So there's always a chance. I wouldn't be surprised if the NFL moved the game to Tuesday at least once this year, with them being so open to really taking over the week with this move on Christmas. It does bring some backlash because people do want to spend time with their families, do want to be around everybody else, and not really have to focus on football. The point was brought up today to me that fantasy championships are also during this week, and it gets pretty serious during fantasy if you're in the championship or you're in that last place game. You're looking to see if you're gonna take the punishment or if you're gonna win yourself a good amount of money. So people will take this pretty seriously. They don't want to necessarily on Christmas because they want to spend time with their families and whatnot. But the NFL, from a business perspective and just trend perspective, trying to make the most revenue and stuff like that, by doing this, it's similar to the NBA where they've really had the Christmas games. Everyone's looking forward to watching Christmas NBA games. The whole day is filled with those games. But it really hasn't, I think people have gotten just used to it. A little, I don't want to say tired of it, but it doesn't bring too much excitement that much, I feel like, in my opinion. So now with the NFL doing it, if they could take this over and make this a regular thing, like I mentioned before, it is an adjustment period. People will have what they have to say at the start, but I just think they will grow into it. And once 2 years pass, 3 years pass, if the NFL is still doing this, they're going to grow into it. And I think the NFL will have the best chance of taking this over because of how the seasons play out. There's a lot less games in the NFL. The NBA, there's tons of games. So the Christmas games don't really mean that much. It's only about halfway through the season, not even. So those games don't really have as much significance as the NFL ones when the playoffs are right on the cusp. And these games mean a lot to some of these teams in terms of seeding and getting the head-to-head over another team if they're vying for one more spot in the playoffs. These games mean a lot more. There's a lot less games, obviously, in the NFL. So the games are more important. You can guarantee the NFL is gonna make them really good games as well in terms of scheduling, who's facing who on Christmas. So all of it points to the NFL games probably being more entertaining, and I wouldn't be surprised, I'm sure, when the game information viewership comes out towards the end of this year that the NFL games drew in a lot more audience than the NBA games. Not to mention there's only 2 NFL games, but the NBA has a lot more games on those days. So it does make sense that the NFL is taking advantage of this opportunity. Looking big picture, what I think of it, I don't hate it right now. I can see the backlash, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. Same with the streaming. I don't want to make like an old joke or something, but I just think it's the older generation of people that don't want to learn streaming and want to get into trying to figure out all these networks of what's streaming where and that stuff. I think for the younger generation that's used to this sort of stuff already, it falls a lot easier. I don't have a problem trying to figure out where these games are being streamed. That's just me. But again, these changes don't really affect me too much. I'm open to it. I like seeing a bit of change with the NFL, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing which teams play on Christmas and how that'll play out. But it's still going to gain a lot of people's attention. It's still going to do great. The NFL says they don't want to make this a regular thing, but that's probably a lie. Once they see the revenue come in, it's going to become a regular thing. Even if it doesn't fall on Wednesday and it fits in the schedule more, it's going to become a regular thing for the NFL. And it's interesting right now how everything's trending towards streaming and stuff like that. The NFL is wise to hop on that trend and try to adjust to it. So that's that. That's the streaming entertaining where you can find your games this upcoming season if you were wondering what all those changes were. But now I'll put a pin in that segment and I will go to the first break of the show. And when I come back, I will talk more in depth about the LSU Pro Day that happened yesterday. The biggest winners are Malik Neighbors and Jaden Daniels from that and how they performed and how they measured and all that stuff. So That's coming up. Don't go anywhere. I have a lot more on today's show of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.